A historically unprecedented 13% of domestic consumer credit card portfolios are sliding directly into critical delinquency, even as the blue-chip Dow Jones Industrial Average breaks through its highest historic record since the geopolitical conflict with Iran began. While headline economic indicators are aggressively weaponized by political figures to claim systemic resilience, the real-world consumer experience is undergoing a violent parabolic split. Peter Atwater, the pioneering macro-analyst who tracks societal confidence patterns, has issued a stark warning regarding this divergence. The standard linear paths of wealth distribution have broken down into a modern K-shaped illusion, where the upper arm moves exponentially toward hyperabundance, while the lower leg turns straight down into a state of absolute structural despair. The terrifying truth of this modern moment is that it completely defies the traditional parameters of a market contraction. In a standard recession, the weakness is universally transparent. Stock portfolios tumble, corporate payrolls shrink, executives pull back capital expenditures, and political leaders are forced to publicly acknowledge that the system is fractured. But today, the systemic pain is completely hidden beneath a glittering surface of record-breaking paper asset values, artificial intelligence hype, and elite luxury consumption, leaving millions of ordinary families to be quietly suffocated by the soaring costs of groceries, rent, gasoline, and basic household utilities. The immediate reaction from corporate institutions and financial equity investors to this escalating structural division has been remarkably detached, almost entirely dismissive. Wall Street continually shrugs off the historic collapse in public consumer sentiment. Asset management firms highlight the extraordinary paper wealth generated by the technological sector, and elite commentators treat the structural distress of the working class as a minor, short-term statistical anomaly. This profound naivety is a textbook demonstration of the market cycle theory recognized by legendary international macro operator George Soros to accumulate immense fortunes. Soros systematically rejected the conventional academic dogma, which claims that financial trading markets are highly efficient structures that accurately calculate and price real-world risks at all times. His core thesis demonstrated that paper markets initially underreact to an unfolding systemic crisis, remaining completely blind to the underlying distress of the physical economy, only to catastrophically overreact later when reality finally breaks through the institutional illusion. Markets react too slowly to a structural disruption initially, remaining in a state of profound denial, only to catastrophically overreact later when reality finally breaks down the door. In this current underreaction phase, elite decision makers look exclusively at nominal stock market indices and riskless convenience card balances, completely unaware that the bottom tier of the population is actively borrowing at predatory interest rates just to execute basic daily survival. The collective consciousness remains trapped in a state of superficial complacency, entirely blind to the reality that when the lower tier of a society is forced to continuously deplete its financial buffers to pay for basic fuel and food, the entire velocity of the consumer economy reaches a structural breaking point. Modern society has constructed a deeply embedded, almost superstitious belief that a rising stock index is a direct reflection of a healthy civilization. This abstract illusion is completely detached from the physical production line of real-world capitalism. During recent high-level financial forums, corporate strategists spent hours analyzing the resilience of mega-cap technology equities and interest rate swaps, yet completely failed to mention the physical supply chain implications of the 3-month-long maritime blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. They operate in a mythical digital universe where commodities simply become slightly more expensive on a trading terminal, maintaining the absurd assumption that as long as paper capital flows, the actual physical volume of energy, raw materials, and consumer products will always be there in whatever quantity they desire. But that is an absolute mathematical fiction. The real economy is in a state of structural jeopardy because transport blockades are systematically driving up food deliveries, household goods, and utility bills far faster than working class wages can adjust. When the broader public is forced to divert every single dollar of their shrinking purchasing power into basic food and gasoline, they are forced to completely abandon discretionary spending. They cancel essential family travel, delay vehicle purchases, avoid local retail shops, and cut back on anything that feels extra. That is how a costly energy crisis moves silently through the systemic infrastructure, beginning with essential utilities, but ultimately crippling local restaurants, independent shops, and small businesses. When the population can no longer afford to consume the goods and services generated by corporations, the inflated valuations celebrated on television will face an unyielding, cascading collapse. If this clinical exposure of the massive gap between Wall Street illusions and real-world economic physics has served as a sudden shock to your financial perspective, it is time to break free from conventional market dogmas. To truly understand how this parabolic divergence functions before the crowd enters its inevitable overreaction phase, you must equip yourself with an independent framework that tracks physical economic reality rather than sanitized public data. By joining our dedicated macroeconomic analysis platform at this critical juncture, you will gain access to specialized analytical models and comprehensive structural resources designed to map out exactly how these hidden wealth splits develop. This framework provides real-time strategic insights into how capital behaves when confidence fractures across political and social lines, giving you the precise tools required to protect your personal stability before the broader system faces its next major structural adjustment. Decades ago, the deep-thinking analyst Carl Sagan warned that modern industrial societies had engineered a terrifying systemic vulnerability. We have built a highly complex civilization entirely dependent on intricate mechanical, chemical, and logistics networks, yet the vast majority of the population, including the political elite making the decisions, has absolutely no understanding of how these production processes actually operate. Because ordinary citizens and policymakers are profoundly insulated from the raw logistics that sustain modern life. They view economic shifts exclusively through the superficial lens of nominal prices, entirely unprepared to interpret the catastrophic impact of losing foundational industrial inputs. Consider how the average observer interprets the current technological boom or the friction in global shipping. They view them as isolated news items on a timeline, completely unaware of the invisible structural connections that hold up their standard of living. 1. The zero-sum automated weapon. Take the massive boom in artificial intelligence as a primary example. At the top of the K-shaped division, AI is celebrated as the ultimate wealth machine, driving corporate equities to record highs and filling executives with extraordinary optimism about automated productivity. But at the bottom of the structure, working-class households view this technological expansion as a direct threat, a zero-sum game that puts an automated target on their backs. They recognize that the efficiencies generated by these algorithms will be used to systematically reduce human headcount and suppress wage negotiations, transferring the entire economic dividend directly to abstract shareholders while leaving the risk of displacement entirely on the backs of the labor force. 2. The structural smuggling of energy shocks. The exact same systemic blindness applies to the current maritime blockades. The general public and the financial media view a 50% surge in gasoline to $4.50 a gallon as a minor, short-term pump annoyance affecting summer travel. They do not understand the hidden role of critical inputs like industrial fertilizer and aluminum, which have been systematically disrupted by the ongoing conflict in the Strait of Hormuz. When these foundational agricultural and manufacturing components face real-world physical shortages, the energy shock does not stay confined to the fuel market. It moves silently through everything. It inflates the cost of food cultivation, disrupts consumer product manufacturing, and strains global logistics until survival itself becomes an unaffordable luxury. The current economic emergency represents a complete failure of the political selection process. Modern institutional systems systematically select for narcissistic individuals who have never managed a physical production line, possess zero operational knowledge of industrial logistics, and do not understand how real-world capitalism actually functions for the ordinary citizen. President Donald Trump described this aggressive cost of living surge as a minor, short-term fluctuation, attempting to deflect public anger by stating that the current index remains lower than the historic 9.1% peak experienced during his predecessor's term. This is the unearned arrogance of an insulated political class that relies on sweeping tariffs and kinetic conflicts without comprehending the structural damage inflicted on the home front. They expect families to remain pacified by macroeconomic metrics, while their actual real-world purchasing power goes backward every single month. When University of Michigan surveys reveal that consumer sentiment has collapsed to a historic record low across Republicans and independents alike, it demonstrates that this is no longer a partisan complaint. It is a total withdrawal of public trust. As Heather Long, chief economist at Navy Federal Credit Union, directly observed, American consumers are angry about the economy because the emotional reality of paying record-breaking bills completely invalidates the resilient narrative broadcast on television. A traditional recession is a temporary economic event with a distinct beginning, middle, and end that damages short-term income. This parabolic K-shaped divergence is something far more dangerous. It is a confidence crisis that systematically liquidates human hope. When the population concludes that the system is fundamentally rigged to enrich asset owners while transforming hard labor into a mechanism that makes families real-world poorer, they stop trusting politicians, official data, and established institutions. Once people believe the future only belongs to those who already own the means of production, the social contract dissolves. This structural injury cannot be repaired by basic interest rate cuts or synthetic political stimulus, because once hope is destroyed, party loyalty fractures, and the resulting despair ultimately drives people into the streets.